"The princess smells," a boy shouted. "What is wrong with her chest?" Another asked while Princess Atsara walked on the village streets alone. Even the maid was scared of walking with her. Some said she was a cursed princess. As she continued to walk alone, the bad smell from her body followed her everywhere she went, drawing the attention of the villagers to her. Some villagers laughed, pointing at her swollen breast. Others whispered to each other. A few even ran away, fearing she carried a curse. Shame and sadness filled Azara's heart. Tears gathered in her eyes. She could not take it anymore. She turned and ran back to her hut, her feet kicking up dust. When she reached home, she fell at her father's feet, crying bitterly. "Father, I cannot do it. They hate me. They fear me." The king looked at his daughter with deep worry, but he said nothing. It all started a few days ago. Princess Atsara had noticed something strange. A bad smell followed her wherever she went, even after she bathed in the cool river. At first, she thought it was the mud from the village paths, but soon, she realized it was coming from her own body, her heart heavy with worry. Worse still, her left breast was swelling, growing bigger each day. It felt heavy and painful, and she did not know why. Fear gripped her heart. She was the only daughter of the king, ruler of the great village. If people found out about her sickness, they would whisper and stare. The elders might say it was a curse. The villagers might fear her. Even her father might be ashamed. So Atsara stayed inside her hut, only coming out when no one was around. She covered herself with thick cloth and sat near the fire, hoping the smoke would hide the smell. When her father sent for her, she lied, saying she was tired. She prayed each night, but the swelling did not stop. Deep inside, she knew this was no ordinary sickness. Something was wrong. The king sat in his palace, deep in thought. For days now, his daughter, Princess Atsara, had not stepped out of her hut. She always had an excuse whenever he called for her. At first, he thought she needed rest, but something felt wrong. Atsara was not the kind of girl to hide away. With worry in his heart, the king decided to check on her himself. He walked to her hut and pushed the door open. Inside, he saw his daughter sitting in a corner, wrapped in thick cloth. Her head was down, and she did not greet him as she always did. "Atsara," he called, stepping inside. "Why have you been hiding?" As the king moved closer, a strong smell filled his nose. It was strange and unpleasant. His face twisted in confusion. He looked around, but there was nothing in the room that could cause such a smell. Then, as he stepped nearer, he realized the smell was coming from his own daughter. His heart pounded. "Atsara, what is this?" he asked. The princess lowered her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. She could no longer hide the truth. But Atsara did not answer. She only cried, her shoulders shaking as tears ran down her face. She could not find the words to explain. The king's hands trembled. He could not believe what he was seeing. This was his only daughter, the pride of the kingdom, the princess who was supposed to bring honor to their family. He ran a hand over his head, his voice rising. "This cannot be happening," he said, pacing the room. "Atsara, do you not know what is ahead of you? The suitors will be arriving soon. Young men from the neighboring villages. Strong men, noble men. How can you develop something like this now?" His chest tightened as fear gripped him. What will the people say? What will Idat say? What will the village think of this? Atsara buried her face in her hands. She wanted to speak, but shame held her back. She could feel the disappointment in her father's voice. The king stared at her, his mind racing. This was no ordinary sickness. Something was very wrong. Atsara wiped her tears and looked at her father. Her voice was weak, but she spoke with fear in her heart. "Father, please," she said. "Don't tell anyone." The king frowned. "Atsara, how can I keep this as a secret? The elders, the healers. Someone must know what is happening to you." "No, father," Atsara cried, shaking her head. "If the village finds out, they will mock me. They already laugh behind my back. If they know my breast is swollen, they will say I am cursed. I cannot let that happen." The king sighed and looked at his daughter. She was suffering, yet she was more afraid of shame than the sickness itself. He sat down beside her and held her hand. Atsara, my child, I do not know what to do, he said, but I will not let anyone mock you. Atsara nodded, her tears falling again. Thank you, father. But deep inside, King Kofi knew the secret would not stay hidden forever. He looked at his daughter, shaking his head. Atsara, what are we going to do? In 3 days, the suitors will arrive. They are coming from far places, ready to ask for your hand in marriage. What will they do when they see you like this? When they smell you and see your swollen breast? Azara's heart tightened. She could not let this happen. She could not afford to lose Prince Agk, the one she truly wanted to marry. If he saw her in this state, he would leave, and she would never have another chance. She took a deep breath and wiped her tears. Father, we must find a way, she said. I cannot lose Prince Agk. We have to do something to make me look good, even if it's just for a while. The king frowned. And what do you want to do? Atsara thought for a moment, then said, maybe we can use perfume, something strong to cover the smell. If I smell nice, no one will notice, at least for some time. The king stared at her, deep in thought. He knew this was not a real solution, but Atsara was desperate. And he, too, did not want her to be disgraced. Are you sure this will work? He asked. I have to try, Atsara whispered. I have no choice. The king sighed. He was not convinced, but he also knew they had little time left. The king looked at his daughter and saw the fear in her eyes. He knew she was desperate. If the suitors came and found her like this, it would bring shame to the royal family. He could not let that happen. He took a deep breath and placed a hand on Azara's shoulder. Do not worry, my daughter, he said. I will go into the village now. I will find a powerful spell. Something that, when sprayed on your body, will make you smell nice. Azara's eyes lit up with hope. Father, are you sure? Yes. The king nodded. There are healers and wise men in this land. Someone must have a solution. I will find it. Just as King Kofi was about to step out of the hut, he turned back and looked at Atsara. His eyes were filled with concern, but his voice was calm and gentle. Atsara, my child, he said softly, I am going to get you the spell. If it works, no one will notice anything. But if it fails, you may remain like this forever. Azara's breath caught in her throat. She lowered her head, listening carefully. The king continued, if the spell does not work, everyone will witness it. The suitors, the elders, the villagers. They will all see that you are smelling with a swollen breast. Are you ready to face that? Are you ready to take the risk? Atsara sat in silence for a moment. Her heart pounded, and her hands trembled slightly. But then she lifted her head and nodded. Yes, father, I am ready. The king studied her face for a while, then gave a small nod. All right, wait here for me. I will return soon. With that, he turned and stepped out of the hut, leaving Atsara alone with her thoughts. She knew this was a gamble, but she had no other choice. Now all she could do was wait. Not long after, King Kofi returned with the spell in his hands. He walked into Azara's hut and sat down beside her. His voice was calm as he spoke. Atsara, here is the spell, he said gently. Use it carefully. Before you throw it on your body, you must say, help me spell, help me spell, help me spell, 3 times. If you don't say it, the spell may not work properly. Atsara nodded and took the spell from him. I understand, father. The king sighed. Good. Now rest. In 3 days, the suitors will come, and you must be ready. With that, he left the hut, leaving Atsara alone with her thoughts. 3 days later, the village was busy. The suitors were on their way. In her hut, Atsara sat in front of a small wooden mirror, dressing herself. She refused to let the palace maidens help her. She did not want anyone to come too close and notice her smell or swollen breast. She wrapped herself in her finest royal cloth, adjusting her beads. Today was important. If the spell worked, she would not have to worry about shame. When she was fully dressed, she reached for the spell. Her hands trembled a little, but she was eager. She quickly unwrapped it, ready to use it. But in her haste, she forgot what her father had told her. She did not say, "Help me, spell. Help me, spell. Help me, spell." Without thinking, she threw the spell on her body. Asara paused. She took a deep breath. The terrible smell that had followed her for weeks was gone. A sweet fragrance filled the air. She smiled. The spell had worked. She looked at herself in the mirror, touching her face. She felt beautiful again. She was ready to meet the suitors. But Atsara did not know that she had made a big mistake. The spell had not been cast properly. And soon she would find out what that meant. The day had come. The village was filled with excitement as the suitors arrived, dressed in their finest robes. Drummers played loudly, dancers moved gracefully, and the people cheered. Everyone had gathered in the palace courtyard, eager to see Princess Atsara meet her suitors. The king sat on his royal stool, watching as the young men from different kingdoms arrived. Among them was Prince Ajk, the one Atsara had longed for the most. The villagers whispered among themselves, admiring the suitors and waiting for the princess to appear. Inside her hut, Atsara took one last look at herself in the mirror. The sweet smell still lingered around her. She smiled, feeling confident. She had done it. The spell had worked. Now she was ready. She stepped out gracefully, her royal cloth flowing as she walked toward the crowd. The villagers clapped and cheered as she approached the gathering. "She looks so beautiful," someone whispered. "Ah, our princess is truly blessed," another said. Prince Ajk's eyes lit up as he saw her. Everything was going as planned. Atsara took slow steps toward the suitors, her heart beating fast. But just as she was about to stand beside Prince Ajk, something strange happened. A foul smell filled the air. The villagers' cheers suddenly died down. Murmurs spread through the crowd. People began sniffing, their faces twisting in confusion. "What is that smell?" someone asked. "It smells worse than a rotten animal," another voice said. Azara's heart dropped. She could feel eyes turning toward her. She glanced at Prince Ajk and saw the confusion in his face. Then, before she could say a word, the crowd began stepping back. People covered their noses. The drummers stopped playing. The dancers froze. The smell was coming from her. Asara gasped. She looked at her hands, then at her dress. The sweet fragrance had disappeared. The spell had failed. A loud gasp came from the crowd. Prince Ajk took a step back, his face filled with shock. The other suitors exchanged uneasy glances. King Kofi stood up, his heart pounding. He looked at his daughter, confusion and fear in his eyes. "Atsara, what is happening?" Atsara could not speak. She could not move. Then the whispers started. "The princess is cursed. She smells like rotten eggs. What is happening to her?" Azara's breathing became heavy. Her worst fear had come true, right in front of everyone. And this was only the beginning.